Okay, we're on DAF Chav Zayin Omid Aleph Rabosai. We're on the 5th line, and we were discussing yesterday the concept that we're going to identify as what's called a kinyan agav. I mentioned to you that yesterday that this is one of the things that we do when the rabbi is going to sell your chametz. Right? What is the rabbi going to do? One of the methods of kinyan that he's going to do with the non-Jew, he's just going to say, I hereby rent to you for a certain minimal amount of money. I hereby rent to you the spaces in my congregants' homes that are currently housing their chametz. And through your acquisition of those rental spaces of real estate, you will also immediately acquire, through that mechanism, all of the chametz that is resting on those spaces. And that's the discussion of our Gemara. The Mishnah had said that through the acquisition of real estate, you can also concomitantly acquire chattel together with it from the seller. The question that we're in the midst of is, does the chattel have to be resting on that piece of real estate that you're purchasing, or can it be somewhere else? Can be somewhere totally different.
On the form, do you sell the value of the real estate when we sell it to, or the chametz on the real estate, or both?
I ask him on the form. I ask him to give me a down payment on as a rental. It's not a sale of the value. It's a rental just of those spaces, which, as long as he gives me a pruta, that's sufficient for the rental. So Toshma. The Amar Rava Bar Yitzchak Amar Rav Shnei Shtarosein. So we want to try and bring another brisa to help us answer this question. So Rab says, well, actually it's not a brisa, it's a discussion of the Amoraim, that there are two halachos vis-a-vis a shtar. And as you'll see, they're discussing very specific laws having to do with writing a shtar in advance or making a shtar a part of a deal. So a seller goes over to a guy and he says, listen, you're not purchasing the field, but I want you to make a kinyan on behalf of the buyer. He says, Zaku b'sadazu leploni, v'kisvulo es ashtar. And once you've made a kinyan, I want you to write a shtar and deliver it to Ploni saying that the field has been sold to him. Now, a seller may have a lot of incentives to do that. He may have a distressed property that he's trying to unload, and he wants to get rid of it as quickly as possible, make sure that the buyer doesn't go back on the deal. So, buyer's in a different city, and he's already put down the money. So the seller says, look, make a kinyan on his behalf, and then when you see him, you'll write him a shtar, you'll give it to him, and that'll be the end of the deal. So, choser b'shtar ve'ino choser b'sadeh. Because the seller has phrased it in a way where the two statements are independent of each other, make a kinyan in the field and write a mashtar. If the seller wishes to rescind the second instruction and say, you know what, I've decided I'm not going to give him a shtar until we meet each other face to face. Maybe he's got to come up with the rest of the cash. Maybe there are other things. I don't want to give him the shtar yet until I see him face to face. He has a right to renege on that, even if the kinyan he cannot rescind, because he's given them an unconditional command to make a kinyan on the field. However, if he says it, this is halacha number 2. If he says it a different way, al menashe tichtavu lo es hashtar choser bein bishtar bein besada. However, if he tells the shaliach, make a kinyan on this field on the condition that you write and deliver a shtar to the buyer, what he's essentially saying is that I don't want your kinyan on behalf of the buyer to take effect until you deliver it to the buyer, the shtar to the buyer. And therefore, if before the shaliach makes it to the buyer, the seller rescinds, he not only rescinds the delivery of the shtar, but he's also rescinding the actual kinyan itself, and he basically nullifies the sale. Rav Chia bar Abin Amar Rav Huna shlosha shtarosein. Rav Chia bar Rav Huna says not only are there 2 halachos that are special case halachos of shtaros, but I have a third one as well. So trei hada amrim, the first 2 are like we just said, and idach im kada mocher v'kasav lo es hashtar ka'osu sheshanin. And I have a third special halacha of a shtar, which is that, let's say, it's not that the buyer and seller are in 2 separate places, but the buyer is not present right now, and the seller wants to make sure that when the buyer shows up, to look at the property and to sign on the deal, there's not going to be any impediment to, because he wants it to be an impulse sale. He doesn't want the guy to be able to think about it too long and change his mind. So he tells the sofer, do me a favor, write up the shtar right away before the buyer shows up, so that as soon as he shows up and I show him the property, we'll say deal, we'll make a l'chaim, and I'll give him the shtar right away. It's already pre-written. So the halacha is in that case, kos from shtar lo mocher, afal pi she'ein lo keach imo. So then the halacha is the sofer is permitted to write the shtar, even if the buyer is not present. And even though it says that this shtar is being delivered to the buyer, and the buyer is nowhere to be found, since the seller is the one authorizing the writing, the sofer has no reason to say, well, it's not true. The seller can relinquish whatever property he wants to whatever person he wants. So therefore it's perfectly legal. And kevin shehechzik imo bekarka nikna shtar b'chol makom shehu. And then furthermore, related to that case, and this is the key point of bringing this whole discussion of the Gemara, is that let's say I, as the seller, agree to meet the buyer after I've written the contract. I go and say, okay, I'll meet you on Tuesday and we'll go look at the property together. As soon as the buyer makes a kinyan on the property by, let's say, digging or something like that, then he immediately acquires the property and he acquires the shtar regardless of where it's resting, even if it's back in the seller's house. So what the Gemara wants to infer from this is Shema mina lo ba'inan sevurim ba. So this proves, this whole discussion, this third halacha proves the question that we had asked yesterday, which is, does the chattel have to be resting on the real estate? From this case, the guy's making a kinyan on a piece of real estate and he acquires the chattel-natured shtar, even though it's not resting on the real estate. So you see that the chattel does not have to be resting on the real estate. But the Gemara says that's not a proof necessarily, because shiny shtar de afsira de Arya hu. No, maybe a shtar is a special case, because a shtar is considered to be like the bridle of the real estate. What do we mean by the bridle? When you put like the bit and the bridle in the animal's mouth, that's considered to be ancillary and completely part of the animal. When I sell you a donkey, it's assumed that I'm selling you the bit and bridle that's strapped to the donkey's mouth and face. So it's the same thing here. Maybe the reason why a shtar is acquired as soon as I acquire the real estate is because even though it's not right there, it's considered to be completely ancillary to the real estate. But let's say I'm selling you a field and I'm selling you a cow. So they're not connected to each other necessarily. And so just because you make a kinyan on the real estate doesn't automatically indicate that the cow could be in another city and for you to acquire it. So, but the Gemara says, but wait a minute, this distinction that you're drawing between shtar and other kinds of chattel is not really true, because v'ha Allah ketani zuhi sheshaninu nechasim she'en lehem achrayis nikdamim nechasim she'esh lehem achrayis bekesef b'shtar v'chazaka. Shema mina lo ba'inan sevurim ba shema mina. But wait a minute. The ensuing discussion of this whole statement of law was that this is a perfect example of how chattel can be acquired via making a kinyan on real estate. And it doesn't make a distinction in that statement. It doesn't distinguish the fact that this is dealing with a shtar on the real estate. It's any chattel. We can infer from this halacha that any chattel can be acquired via making a kinyan on real estate independently. And so from here we learn, from this whole discussion, we see very clearly that when I make a kinyan on real estate, I can also acquire chattel, even when the chattel is not resting on the real estate. That's the conclusion of the Gemara.
So if you are selling your chametz, and you don't put let's say you have chametz at your office, but you don't put that address on your document, is that considered?
Well, we don't, as a matter of course, we do not operate this way. Remember, we can't always paskin like the Gemara. So as a matter of course, we always make sure that the Gentile acquires the property that's immediately under the chametz. That's immediately under the chametz. So if the chametz is on the shelf in your house, he acquires the shelf space. And then through his acquisition of the shelf space, he acquires the chametz that's on top of it.
And you have to list the address of each place.
You're supposed to list the address. You're supposed to be as specific as possible. If you're not, so then the Gentile, we allow it anyway. But there are a lot of things that you're supposed to do and we don't do properly. In other words, that's why we encourage people when they sell their chametz, be as specific as possible. I mentioned yesterday in the Devar Halacha, you have to be as accurate as possible in the true valuation of the chametz. You can't put, oh, my chametz is worth $10,000. I mean, I've seen ridiculous amounts. One guy put $20,000 as his value of his chametz. I said, wow, can I take a loan? I mean,
expensive scotch.
I know, but that's really, I mean, please, $20,000 for a balabas in his liquor cabinet? I mean, maybe he should be writing a bigger check to tzedakah. Anyway, let's go weiter. Hibayalahu. Mi ba'inan agav olo. So now the next question is, does a person when the seller stipulates that you're going to make an acquisition on the real estate, and through that you'll make an acquisition on the metaltalin, on the chattel, does he have to say the word agav or not? Now the word agav, I would translate it as via. You're going to acquire the chattel via the real estate, because that's really what's happening. Does he have to specify that, or can he just say, make a kinyan on the real estate and the chattel will be yours as well? So, Tashma, de katani kolhani velo katani agav. So look, we've just had a full day and a half of discussion on this method of kinyan, and nowhere was the word agav mentioned, that you have to say the word vaya specifically. Like yesterday, we talked about a guy who went up to Yerushalayim and wanted to gift someone 100 cows and 100 barrels of wine. Nowhere did we say the word agav over there, so it seems like you don't have to say it. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, v'li taimech kinimi katani, but it doesn't say over there acquire, make a kinyan. So therefore, are you suggesting that the seller doesn't have to say that? Of course he has to say that. So ella adda omar kini, hachanami adda omar agav, v'hilchasa tzuvurim lo ba'inan, agavu kini ba'inan. And therefore, you can't infer anything from the language. The language was written in a shorthand version, and just like the seller has to specify, I want you to make a kinyan on the real estate, he also has to say, make a kinyan on the real estate, and via agav, the real estate, you'll be kona the metaltalin. And the final halacha is, we do not require the real estate to be directly underneath the chattel, but we do require the seller to say kini and agav in the course of his instructions to the buyer. Now, ibayalahu sada b'mecher metaltalin b'matanamahu. Now we have another related question, okay, which is, what if you want to mix and match the methods, not only the method of kinyan, but also the type of kinyan that's being made? There are two types of kinyan. One is a sale and one is a gift. So what if you sell the real estate and you want to gift the metaltalin? Can the acquirer make a kinyan on the real estate and then acquire the metaltalin, even though it's being given as a gift? It's a different type of acquisition, or not? So the Gemara says, Tashma, Isser Shani Asid Lambud Nasim Lioshuma Kama Musker Lo, Shma Mina. Let's go back to the story that we learned yesterday. Remember, Rabbi Gamliel was on a boat with a group of sages, and he remembered, I forgot to tithe my produce back at home. So he went over to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanan. He says, Rabbi Yeshua, you're a Levi. Give me a pruta. You'll rent the space where my grain is resting, and then you'll acquire the 10% of grain that I owe to the Levi for Meiser. So what do you see from here? It was a mix and match. He was renting, which is a purchase, a temporary purchase of the real estate, plus being gifted the grain. So you see that you can mix and match sales and gifts. That's the proof. Now, ibayaluhu. Now let's ask another question. What about the following case? What if a seller says to Ruvain, look, Ruvain, I'm selling you this real estate, and I'm selling to Shimon a cow. But Shimon's not available, he's too busy. Do me a favor. When you make the kinyan on your real estate, on this field that I'm selling you, make a kinyan on behalf of Ruvain on the cow. Does that work? On the one hand, we're saying that you can acquire metaltalin agav karka. But is it only if you're doing it for yourself, or can you mix and match? Can you say, I'll acquire the field for myself, and I'll acquire the metaltalin thereby for somebody else? So Tashma, let's go back to our story. Isser shani asid lamud nasan lakiva ben Yosef kadesh yizka bola aniyim umakomo musker lo. So let's go back to the second part of the story. Rabbi Gamliel realized that he also needed to take Meiser Ani. He needed to take a second tithe for the poor. So he goes over to Rabbi Akiva. He says, Rabbi Akiva, give me a pruta, so you acquire the land that's underneath the 10% of grain, and then I want you to make a kinyan on the grain on behalf of the aniyim. So isn't that the same case? He's making a kinyan on the real estate for himself, and he's making a kinyan on the grain on behalf of other people. So you see that it does work. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. My muskar lemaiser. Not necessarily, says the Gemara. Maybe when he was asking Rabbi Akiva to give him a pruta for the land, it wasn't being rented specifically to the person of Rabbi Akiva. It was being rented that Rabbi Akiva was acting as an agent for the poor who were going to be acquiring the grain. So maybe that's the way you look at it. So therefore, it's not a proof to our question of whether you're making an acquisition for yourself personally and you want to make on the real estate and you want to acquire on behalf of someone else the metaltalin. The iba is saying shiny Rabbi Akiva diyad aniyim hava. Alternatively, says the Gemara, I'll give you a different answer why this is not a proof. Even if you say that the land was rented by Rabbi Akiva for himself personally, perhaps Rabbi Akiva's kinyan of the grain on behalf of aniyim is different from all other cases, because Rabbi Akiva was known as the Gabbai Tzedakah. He was known as the agent for the aniyim. And when you're specified as someone's agent, it's almost as if you're a complete representative of that other person. But in a case where the seller says to Ruvain, go ahead and make a kinyan on the real estate for yourself and make a kinyan on the cow for Shimon, well, Ruvain has not been assigned as a representative of Shimon. Maybe it doesn't work over there. Maybe it only works in a case where it's already publicly known, and like in the case of Rabbi Akiva, that he represents all the poor people. So anyway, so we don't have an answer to that second question, whether that will work or not. Amar Rava, lo shanu elo shenasan demei kulan, avolo nasan demei kulan lo kana ela keneged ma'osav. Now Rava says an interesting halacha, which you might think at face value contradicts what we just said, that you can mix and match a sale and a gift. But I don't think it does, because what Rava is saying is that if the seller says to the buyer, I'm selling you real estate and chattel together, it's a package deal, but the value that I'm charging you is the full value of the real estate, and I'm throwing in the chattel. But it's all a sale. It's not like one's a sale and one's a gift. This is all a sale. So Rava's point is that since you're declaring it all to be a sale, the kinyan can only help for property that is worth the money that was put down. So therefore, if the field is worth 100 and the cow is worth 50, and the buyer only presents him with 100, so then by making a kinyan on the field, you're not going to be kona the cow, because you didn't pay for the cow. Even though it was stipulated, make a kinyan on the field, and you'll also acquire the cow, but since the money that I paid on the sale does not cover the cost of the cow, I can't be kona the cow by making a kinyan on the field. What the seller will have to do is, he'll have to tell me, make a separate kinyan on the cow, and it's yours. It's yours for free. Tanya kavase de Rava. We have a brisa to support Rava. Yafe koach hakesef mikoach hashtar v'koach hashtar mikoach hakesef. Here's a brisa. The brisa says that in certain respects, the mechanism of kesef is superior to the mechanism of shtar for making kinyanim, and in some respects, vice versa. Shtar is better than kesef. What do we mean? Yafe koach hakesef shakesef podim bo hekdesho sumaiser sheni ma she'en kein b'shtar. On the one hand, kesef is superior because it can be used for pidyon. It can be used to redeem kedusha off of hekdish or off of maiser sheni, which cannot be done by a piece of paper. It can only be done by coins. The yafe koach hashtar shashtar motzi bevas yisrael ma she'en kein b'kesef. In what respect is shtar superior? Well, a shtar can be used to divorce your wife, but you can't use money as a mechanism for divorce. And then the brisa continues and it says, "The yafe koach shneim mikoach chazaka, v'koach chazaka mikoach shneim." That in one respect, kesef and shtar are superior to the third method of kinyan for real estate, which is chazaka, showing ownership. And in some respects, chazaka is stronger than kesef and shtar. Yafe koach shneim sheshneim konim be'eved ivri, ma she'en kein b'chazaka. In one sense, koach and shtar are superior to chazaka, because you can use kesef and shtar to purchase an eved ivri, a Hebrew slave, and you can't use chazaka to purchase an Eved Ivri. Like you can't start working him and thereby demonstrate ownership. Yafika chazaka shechazaka machar lo eser sados be'eser medinos keven shehechzik be'echas mehem kanam kulam. But in one respect, chazaka is superior to kesef and shtar, because if a person is purchasing 10 fields and he only makes a chazaka in one of those 10, then that chazaka, as long as it's clearly understood between the seller and the buyer that he's purchasing all 10 fields, then the chazaka on one field will help to purchase all the fields. But then, and here's the key line, but when is this true? Shenasan lo demei kulan. Avolo nasan lo demei kulan lo kana ela keneged ma'osav. But that's only true when the buyer has put down cash that is equivalent to the value of all 10 fields. Then he needs only to make a chazaka on one of the 10 fields in order to acquire all of them, using this concept of agav, that through, via my purchase of the one field, I can purchase all the other fields. But if I only put down a smaller amount of money that's only worth the one field that I'm making a kinyan on, then I can't purchase the other fields. And therefore the Gemara says, you see from this brisa, that the same thing will be true when you're making a kinyan agav on real estate and chattel, not only on real estate and real estate.
Because the purchases have to be contemporaneous. So, or can you say, I'm buying the first installment now, here's the first installment of payment?
No, but you'd have to make a separate kinyan when you come up with the rest of the money. That's the point. The Gemara is saying, so you'll come up with the next money for the next field, make another kinyan. This kinyan is not going to help. Misayeh le Shmuel. And this brisa is also a support to Shmuel, because the Amar Shmuel, Machar lo eser sados be'eser medinos, that if a person sells 10 fields to a buyer, and the fields are in 10 different countries potentially, Kevin shehechzik be'echas mehen kana es kula. All the buyer has to do is make a chazaka on one field, and he automatically acquires all of them. And again, provided that he puts down the full value. Amar Ravacha bereda Ravika teda sheilu masalo eser behemos ba'afser echad v'amar leikani milo kani. So Ravacha says it's only logical to say that, because after all, if a guy were to tie up 10 animals and then give the leash or the bridle of one of the animals to the buyer, and he'd make a kinyan through Masira of one animal, then surely he would acquire all 9 other animals since they're all tied together. So therefore, it only stands to reason that if you're making a kinyan on one plot of real estate, that should help for all of the other pieces of real estate. So Amar Lei, so Shmuel said back to him, Midame, that's not a proof to what I'm saying, because Hasam igudo biyado, hacha ein igudo biyado. He says there, all of the animals are connected, they're tied together. So that's why it's very obvious that in that case, the kinyan on one helps for all the others. But I'm saying an even bigger chiddush. Even though the properties are non-contiguous, one property is in Canada, the other one's in China, as long as I make a kinyan on the property in China, or Canada, I can acquire the property in China. So, one second, Ika da Amre, but there are others who learn the discussion just the opposite. Amar Ravacha bereda Ravika teda de lo kani. Ravacha was trying to argue with Shmuel, and he was trying to say, no, making a kinyan on one property does not help to be kona the other property. You know why? Because ilu masr lo eser behemos ba'afser echad v'amar lo zukini mikane. He says, because let's say you have 10 animals that are tied together, and the seller tells the buyer, acquire just this one, Bessie, right? And so the buyer grabs a hold of the leash on Bessie. That's not going to mean that he's going to acquire the other properties, because it's clear from the conversation that the seller is only selling him this one animal, and therefore he's only being kind of that one animal. So too, when you make a kinyan on one piece of land, and it's not contiguous to the other pieces of land, you can only be kind of, that kinyan only helps for that property, doesn't help for the other properties. So therefore Ravacha is disputing Shmuel's halacha. And Shmuel says back to him, Mi dame, Hasam gufim muchlakim, hacha sadana da'ara chadhu. Shmuel's response is, you're comparing apples and oranges. He says, 10 animals are 10 discrete, distinct entities. And therefore, by making a kinyan on one, you're not automatically making a kinyan on the other 9. But with real estate, all real estate is connected. Because of the planet Earth. All real estate is connected in one way or the other. Even, and therefore, by making a kinyan on the property in Canada, it's connected to China. You could dig a tunnel, in theory, and make your way from Canada to China, and the properties would be connected. So therefore, that's why it's different from making a kinyan on one animal. That's not going to help for the other animals. Go ahead, Gersh.
It answered.
Okay, all right, good. Next, v'zokekim es anachasim v'chulei. The next part of the Mishnah had said that there's this concept that we're going to call Gilgul. Gilgul means a lot of things. Gilgul means reincarnation, right, on the mystical level. But here the term Gilgul means that when a person is obligated to take a shvuah in court, and there are two claims. For one of the claims, I can obligate my opponent to take a shvuah. For the other claim, I cannot obligate him to take a shvuah. The principle of Gilgul Shvuah says that once I can obligate you to take a shvuah for claim A, I can automatically obligate you to take a shvuah for claim B, even though normally I would have no legal right to obligate you. So, for example, let's say I have a claim against you for just real estate. I say you owe me a field. So there's a halacha of ein nishbon al karkos. There's never a shvuah to be taken for real estate claims. But let's say I have a claim against you for both metaltalin and karkos. I say you owe me $1,000 plus you owe me that field. And one witness comes along, and one witness is not enough for evidence to allow me to win the case, but it is enough to force the defendant to take a shvuah, that he doesn't owe it to me. So now that I can force him to take a shvuah on the metaltalin, I can now force him to take a shvuah on the karka as well, on the real estate as well. That's what our Mishnah had said. So the Gemara asks, Amar Ula, minayin legilgul shvuah min haTorah. How do we know that this concept of gilgul shvuah is a Torah concept, that once I can obligate you for A, I can obligate you for B? Shenamar va'amra ha'isha amein amein. We learn this out from the laws of Sota. Now, the Torah says that after the Kohen tells her everything that's going to happen if she was unfaithful, the woman shall say, Amen, Amen, which is strange. Why does she have to say Amen twice? So, Utnan almahi omeris Amen, Amen. Why does she have to say the word Amen twice? Amen al ha'ala, Amen al ha'shavua, Amen ime ish zeh, Amen ime ish acher, Amen shalos atisi arusa, unasua v'shomeres yavam uchenusa. Period. That she's actually saying Amen to a number of contingencies. She's saying Amen to the curse, where the Kohen says that if you were unfaithful, your belly's going to swell and your thigh will fall away. That's one Amen. The Amen that also covers that because she's taking an oath. She's taking an oath that she's been faithful to her husband through answering Amen. Amen is also an affirmation. Not only did I not commit adultery with my accused paramour, where there was kinoi and stira, if you remember, there was a seclusion with that guy, with witnesses, but I also didn't commit adultery with any other man. And also, I have to say, Amen, that not only did I not commit adultery as a married woman, as a nesua, living with my husband, but I also did not commit adultery when we were betrothed, as a betrothed wife. Not only did I not commit adultery after Yibum, but I even did not commit adultery when I was waiting to do Yibum with the brother of my deceased husband. That's the end of the Brisa. So now, that's the end of Ula's statement. So, or that's the end of the, it's the end of the Mishnah. So, Arusa Hichlem. So now Ula just explains, he says, where do we see the concept of Gilgul from that discussion? Because when a woman says, I hereby swear that I did not commit adultery as an Arusa, are we talking about a woman who's currently coming to the temple as an Arusa? And there's two different cases. Either when she comes as an Arusa, she has to take a vow, or when she comes as an Asur, she has to take a vow. Is that what we mean? So, Ilema dekani la kishihi Arusa, v'komashki la kishi Arusa, v'hatznan Arusa, v'shomeres yavam lo shosos v'lo no los ksuva. So, but that can't be, because if the husband brings his betrothed, a girl that he has erison with, and he brings her to the temple, we don't, and there was kinoi, and there was also kinoi and stira when she was in Arusa, that after they got betrothed, he told her, don't be seen with Ploni, and then witnesses see her with Ploni, and then he brings her as an Arusa to the temple. We don't give that woman to drink. You know why? My taima, tachasi sheichom arachmana beleka. Because the Torah says that the sota waters only work when the woman is already married as a nesua, living with her husband under the same roof. That's when the waters will work. Otherwise, you don't do it. So, ela dekani la kishi arusa v'nistera kishi arusa v'kamashki la kishi nesua. So maybe what it means is that she's answering amen to the fact that she wasn't unfaithful as an arusa, because what happened? They got betrothed. Husband said, don't be seen with Ploni. She was seen with Ploni. And then they had nisuin. And then after he marries her, brings her into his home, he says, you know what? You're in Nesua now. The water will work. I'm taking you to the Kohen. But the Gemara says that also is not going to work, because mi bat kilo maya, because v'nika ha'ish mei avon amar rachmana bizman sheishmenuka mei avon ma'in bot kenes ishto. Ein ha'ishmenuka mei avon ein ma'in bot kenes ishto. That's not going to work either, because the Torah says that the only time the sota water works on the woman is if the husband is pure and did not commit a sin. But what's the halacha? Once you know that there was kinoi and stira with your wife, meaning that if your wife secluded herself with a man, the halacha is you're not allowed to live with her anymore. So how could he take her and have nisuin with her? If he does, then he won't be allowed to take her to drink the water. So ella al yedei gilgul. So rather, what do we mean? We're talking about the following case. We're talking about a case where the husband he's been married to his wife for 10 years. And he now has had kinoi and stira, says, don't be seen with Ploni, and she's seen with Ploni. He brings her to the temple as a nesua. What we're essentially saying is, since he can make her swear that she didn't have an affair with this guy, he can also go back in the history and say, wait a minute, maybe you knew that guy when you were both in university or something, when you were still just my arusa. That shows you that even though I wasn't able to use this oath against you as an arusa, but since I can use it now as an asua, when you're in asua, I can also be megalgel. I can link it to other cases as well as an arusa.
So Gilgal Shvu only for that guy or for any guy?
So the Mishnah had said it works for any guy.
Any guy.
She also has it not only works for him during Erisin, but it works for other people as well. So now the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. You've proven to me that there's a concept of Gilgal Shvua for a sota. Ashkechan sota di isura. Mamona minolan. But how do you know that this applies to laws which are purely financial? Maybe when it comes to Isser Veheter, laws of forbidden and prohibited issues, maybe that's why Gilgal Shvua works. But normally we can't extrapolate from the laws of Isser Veheter to the laws of finance. How do you know it works by finance? That if I can make a guy swear on one thing that he doesn't owe, I can make him swear on the other thing that he doesn't owe. So as Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, Kal V'chomer. So the Rabbi Shmuel's base medrash taught that it's a Kal V'chomer. Umasota shelo nitna lihitava be'ed echad megalgalin, mamon shenitan lihitava be'ed echad enodin shemegalgalin. Because the Kal V'chomer is as follows. Normally, you're right. Normally, I can't extrapolate from the laws of Hisr Veheter to the laws of finance. But here you have a Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer is like this. We raise the bar very high in order to make a sota take an oath. What do we require? We require 2 witnesses who have to have witnessed her seclude herself with an accused paramour. So if, in that case, the Torah still allows for what we call Gilgal, to roll over that power of the husband to make her swear on additional things, then surely when the bar is lower on requiring a shvuah, where only 1 witness is required to make a person take a shvuah, like in laws of finance, where if there's 1 witness who says that guy owes me money, I can make him take a shvuah, then surely I have the power of Gilgal shvuah over there as well. So the Gemara is essentially saying, normally you can't connect Isser Veheter to finance. But here, because of this Kal V'chomer, you can. Which leads us to the next point, which is, Ashkechan bevadai safek minola. So that only tells me that in cases of where the law of taking a shvuah, midioraisa, only applies where the plaintiff has a definitive claim. What I mean by where he has a tainus bari, where he says, I know that you owe me this money. But there is another kind of shavua that the rabbis allowed for, which is not midioraisa, and they said that even when the plaintiff is not for sure that the other guy owes him money, but there's a good possibility that he owes him money, sometimes we'll allow for a shavua. What's an example? Sometimes there's a situation of a dissolution of a partnership. That's one example. Two partners are dissolving their partnership and they're dividing all of the assets of the corporation. In that situation, the Chachamim said that even though I have no evidence that you may have hidden some of the assets of the business, each one of us has to swear to the other partner that we haven't hidden any assets of the business and purchased property on the Cayman Islands and stuff like that, or in Panama or wherever, right? Right? So, how do you know that even though there's no definitive claim, there's only a claim of maybe, that there too you can apply the principle of Gilgal Shvua, which means I can not only make you swear that you don't owe cash or chattel that you've been hiding from the corporation, but even property that may be owned by the corporation, where normally I would not be able to make you swear, I can do a Gilgal from chattel onto real estate. So Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Nemra Shvua b'chutz v'nemra Shvua b'fnim. Ma Shvua hamura b'fnim asa b'safei kavadai, af Shvua hamura b'chutz asa b'safei kavadai. So the answer is, based on the Kal V'chomer that we made before, now we can connect all the laws of Sota to the laws of finance. Just like by Sota, the husband is not definitively saying that he knows for sure that my wife committed adultery. He suspects. It's only a tainus safek. It's only a tainus shema. I think that she might have committed adultery. Therefore, all other cases that are in dealing with finance, there too, even if it's only a tainus safek, if it's a maybe, there too, we know that you can apply the principle of Gilgal Shvua. I just explained this to you very subtly, like the way Tosfos speaks it out, but I also want to mention something else. Tosfos raises a very interesting point. Let's say I take you to court, and I have a specific claim on a piece of property, or on a cow, or on a certain loan that I believe you owe me. One witness comes along and holds you, and based on that one witness's testimony, the Beis Din makes you take a shvua. Can I now say, ha 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 ha, I have so much power now, I can make you swear on anything? 30 years ago, when we were playing baseball in Little League, I lost my baseball. And I suspect that you stole it. Swear to me that you didn't steal that baseball that I lost 30 years. Can I do that? So Tosfos says no. It's a limited, the Gilgal Shvua principle is limited. It doesn't mean like you can think up of anything under the sun that you want him to take, the guy take a vow. He says like this. He says, Eladafka b'safek sheyesh lo lachush kitzas. He says there has to be some reasonable doubt. There has to be some grounds for the suspicion of the accusation. Could go nasalo shutavo aris. For example, if you were my partner and we're dissolving a partnership, then not only can I make you swear on the chattel, I can make you swear on the real estate. Because there's grounds for, there's a connection. There's grounds for concern that maybe you may have pocketed something. Or you were working for me. Swear to me that when you were working for me, you didn't pocket more as my sharecropper than your fair share. And this is something that's clarified in Masechah Shavuos. But if there was no connection at all between you and me and that baseball, then I can't be Megalgal Shvua just because I have the power of guilt. Have a wonderful